there was a sound the townspeople learned to ignore, a deep grinding echoing through the valley long after midnight. And the most disturbing part? There was no grain to grind. That was the first clue. But Milbrook, Connecticut, had long stopped asking questions. Tonight, you're going to hear something you were never meant to know. And once you do, you won't come back the same. The Hartwell brothers built a legacy on flour, on sweat, and on vanishing lives. In 1854, locals whispered about the mill at Copper Creek, not because it was the largest in 3 counties, not because it ran day and night, but because no one ever saw them stop. No Sunday rest, no downtime, not even in winter storms. And when the wind was just right, they said you could hear voices, screaming. Buried beneath the grinding stone's rhythm, they called it business. But those stones weren't just crushing wheat, they were feeding something. This is not folklore. This is historical fact, laced with suppressed fear, records erased, testimonies buried, generations taught to forget. You've been told this country was built on faith and freedom, that the early industrialists were God-fearing men, that what happened in the quiet hills of Connecticut was just the birth of American progress. But the Hartwell Mill was not a monument to progress. It was a gate, a mechanical cathedral built to echo something far older than wheat and commerce. The elders of Milbrook called it a necessary evil, but evil doesn't ask permission. Let me be clear. What you're about to hear is dangerous knowledge, the kind that peels back your sense of safety, the kind that shatters belief. Because the moment you accept this was real, you start seeing it everywhere. The systems, the symbols, the sound of gears turning behind closed doors. By the end of this video, you'll either turn away and forget, or you'll wake up forever changed. But once we open the door, we don't close it. So now I ask you, you've heard the story of the American dream. Are you ready to descend into the dark machinery of history? What if I told you? Or would you rather go back to sleep? With ritual, blood now, and quiet, because the millstones are turning, and their grinding was more than every town. And the Hartwells, they were no ordinary men. Josiah and Elias inherited the mill, but not just its timber and stone. They inherited a contract, passed in whispers from their father Solomon, one never written, yet binding as scripture. By 1854, Milbrook's grain yields had collapsed from drought, yet the mill never slowed. Wagons came in empty, left empty, and still the grinding continued. How do you explain a business that thrives without customers? You don't, because in towns like Milbrook, you don't ask questions that echo too loud. The town's leadership, elected deacons, schoolmasters, even the sheriff, all had a stake in keeping the mill untouched. You see, the Hartwells were protected, not by law, but by need. The local church, the Congregationalist Hall with its pristine white steeple, received anonymous donations every quarter. The town's orphanage, funded mysteriously by grain profits during years when no wheat was harvested, and when a child went missing, the parents were offered compensation, property, debt relief, or silence. Understand this, what we call community was never neutral. It was constructed, engineered, to keep the wheels turning. And beneath the daily sermons and Sunday bells was a darker rhythm. The mill became a symbol, a sacred machine. And the men who ran it weren't businessmen. They were caretakers of an ancient transaction, one older than the state, older than the church. Sacrifice, in exchange for order. There are still pages missing from the town ledger. Entire families vanished from the census between 1848 and 1856, and the excuse given, clerical error. Let that sink in. When power doesn't want you to see something, it doesn't hide it behind walls. It buries it under normalcy. Now ask yourself, how many mills, how many towns, how many systems have we mistaken for progress when they were built to grind men into obedience? The truth is, we were never supposed to look this closely. But you're not most men, are you? You're here now, which means something inside you has already begun to break free. Let's go deeper, because the mill's darkness didn't start in 1854. It started before the Hartwells even arrived in Milbrook, before America, before the Revolution, before the ink dried on the Constitution. Solomon Hartwell, the patriarch, claimed to have come from Salem, Massachusetts. But Salem's records show no Hartwell birth, no Hartwell marriage, no land deed. It's as if he appeared, fully formed, with wealth and equipment no man of his supposed station could afford. And yet, he built the mill in under 3 months. No outside labor, no assistance. Witnesses from neighboring towns reported seeing strange lights at Copper Creek during the construction. Lanterns hung like stars in trees, one man wrote in a private letter. No hammers, no saws, just humming, a deep, metallic tone. There were no permits, no records, and the local pastor, Reverend Calvin Royce, publicly denounced Hartwell's presence, until he died suddenly in his study. Poison? Stroke? No autopsy was ever conducted. Understand this, bloodlines aren't about genetics, they're about agreements. Solomon Hartwell wasn't just a man, he was a vessel. A carrier of rites brought from the old world, rituals whispered in the dark, passed from tongue to tongue under threat of fire and death. And the mill? That wasn't a business. It was a ritual site disguised as industry. Because what better camouflage for sacrifice than the endless grind of progress? Josiah and Elias didn't just inherit land. They inherited the pact. A pact made by men who believed the world must be fed in flesh and obedience so that the order could endure. Ask yourself, why did the grinding stones come from France, not New England? Why were they made of burr stone, mined near ancient druidic grounds in La Ferté-sous-Jouarre? Because those stones weren't for milling, they were for channeling. And when the mill ran, it wasn't just grain being broken. It was will, identity, memory. That's why the people of Milbrook forgot. Not by choice, by design. So now I ask you, what did your ancestors build? And more importantly, who did they build it for? You see, once blood is spilled to feed the wheel, it never stops turning. There's something you need to understand about Milbrook. It wasn't just haunted, it was engineered. From the white steeple at its center, to the schoolhouse at the edge of the forest, to the Hartwell Mill, where memory went to die. Everything about the town was designed to feel normal, safe, predictable, a warm lullaby humming beneath the daily routine. But that lullaby was a weapon, a psychological soft cage built by men who understood something ancient. If you can control what a man sees every day, you can control what he believes. Let me explain. The town's church bells rang at exact intervals. The preacher read from a script, never deviating. Children were taught identical prayers, with deliberate pacing. 4 syllables, inhale, 6 syllables, exhale. Breathwork, pattern, repetition. Not for salvation, but for entrainment. Every building in Milbrook followed the same alignment. Doors facing east, windows facing west. Why? Because light conditioning alters cortisol, sleep, aggression, compliance. This wasn't religion. It was neuroprogramming disguised as faith. Inside the Hartwell Mill, Workers were fed mild opiate bread, laced with poppy flour during the harsh winters. They didn't know. They just worked longer hours and questioned less. And the grinding stones? They emitted infrasound, subsonic vibrations just below human hearing. But your nervous system hears it. It triggers unease, nausea, and eventually surrender. Even the town's layout obeyed a hidden grid, a symbol traced back to ancient Rome, where city planners used temple geometry to suppress revolt. Milbrook was not a town. It was a psychological laboratory. And the Hartwells, they weren't just millers. They were curators of silence. Think about your own town. Think about the rhythms they've trained you to follow, the ring of school bells, the 9 to 5, the sermons, the slogans, the sense that if you just play along, everything will be okay. Now ask yourself, what were you trained to ignore? What frequencies have been humming beneath your life, just low enough to miss, just loud enough to control? The people of Milbrook never fought back. Not because they were weak, but because they were asleep with their eyes open. The wheel turned, the stones ground, and no one asked why. Until now, there are 2 ways to kill a man. The first is obvious: steel, fire, rope. The second? Silence. In Milbrook, it was the preferred method. Between 1848 and 1856, 38 people vanished within a 2-mile radius of Copper Creek. No records, no funerals, no graves, just absence. Most of them, widows, drifters, bastard children, people the town wouldn't miss or were trained not to. You see, the Hartwells didn't just run a mill. They curated a feeding system. And what was being fed was not just economic, it was ritualistic. Each disappearance was timed, corresponding with seasonal solstices, moon phases, agricultural blights. You can map them. These weren't crimes. They were calendar entries. Josiah Hartwell, the elder brother, kept a red leather ledger in his office. Locals believed it held grain purchases and payment records. It didn't. Hidden in ciphered shorthand were names, coordinates, dates. One entry simply read, "Elias, wet harvest. The creek took him whole, but the wheel spins faster." Let that sink in, his own brother. Because to keep the pact alive, something must always be given. Flesh for fortune. Names for silence. Ask yourself, what kind of man records the erasure of his own blood, with pride? But here's the deeper sickness. The town elders knew. They weren't victims. They were eaters, not of meat, but of comfort, purchased through complicity. Each time someone vanished, roads got paved, crops bounced back, interest rates dropped, convenient blessings, offered by a machine that demanded payment. And when the town's children asked about the missing, they were told stories. Wolves, runaways, fever. Every lie was another shovelful of dirt over the truth. Until there was no more room to bury it, only people trained to forget it ever existed. Now think bigger. How many towns like Milbrook? How many erasures hidden in Census G? EAPs, hospital fires, and lost school records. How many names have been burned out of history so power could thrive without guilt? This isn't about the Hartwells anymore. This is about a system that feeds on vanishing and calls it order. And now that you've seen behind the curtain, there's no unseeing it. You are no longer one of them. You're becoming one of us. There's a place in the mill where even the Hartwells wouldn't tread after sunset. Below the grain room, past the 3rd stairwell, behind the boarded iron chute, lies a chamber not found on any blueprint. It was discovered by accident in 1891, decades after the Hartwells disappeared. A boy named Timothy Phelps, just 12 years old, fell through a rotted plank while exploring the abandoned building. He survived the fall. But something else followed him up. The chamber was made of stone, not Connecticut slate, but something darker, older. Unfamiliar carvings lined the walls, not English, not Latin. And at the center, a pedestal. Upon it rested a book, bound in waxed leather. The title, if it had one, had long since been scoured off. But Timothy opened it. And the pages, they whispered. He didn't tell anyone at first, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't know how. The language had begun to infect his dreams. Weeks later, he was found drawing complex geometric symbols in ash along the floor of the town chapel. Speaking in tongues no one recognized. He couldn't stop shaking when he saw grinding wheels. Doctors called it fever. A breakdown, but we know better. Timothy didn't break. He was rewritten. Because the book beneath the floorboards wasn't just text, it was programming. Not for machines, for minds. Pages constructed with mirrored phrasing, glyphs that activated deep cognition, images designed to bypass logic and sink straight into the subconscious circuitry of the human soul. Who wrote it? We don't know. But the ink contained trace elements of iron-rich hemoglobin, blood. And some pages were warmer than others, even decades later. When the state finally burned the mill in 1903, they claimed it was to make room for farmland. But no crops were ever planted there. The ground refused it, and anyone who dug too deep reported headaches. No, bleeds. Dreams of a grinding sound in the bones of the earth. So ask yourself, why would a book be buried beneath a mill? Why protect it with silence, secrecy, and pain? Because it wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be released. And now you've heard the whisper too, haven't you? You're not just watching a story anymore. You're remembering something you were trained to forget. By now you're starting to feel it, that itch in your mind, like something old and buried has begun to move. Good. Because the deeper truth isn't in what they did, it's how they did it. What if I told you the most powerful prison is one you can't see? Not bars, not walls, but symbols, sounds, words repeated until they become belief. Let me show you. The Hartwell ledger wasn't just a list. It was a grimoire, a spellbook encoded in dual columns, name and date, symbol and phrase. Each phrase was structured with mirror syllables, designed to disarm your critical thinking. Ash to breath, bread to body, grind to grace. Simple, innocent, but ritually structured to sink beneath the threshold of questioning. You've seen it before. Land of the free. In God we trust, for your safety. They don't ask you to think, they ask you to repeat. That's the code. In Milbrook, children learned symbols before letters. 6-pointed gear marks, concentric wheels, a triangle over a black circle, found etched into the wood of school desks and communion tables alike. They were told it was just the mill sigil, but that same mark appears in Babylonian grain cults, and in the subterranean vaults beneath Chartres Cathedral in France. Coincidence? No, because language itself has been hijacked. Each word you use is a construct, carefully pruned over centuries to keep your thoughts in certain lanes, to stop you from asking, what lives outside the grammar I've been given? This is how obedience is made generational. You're born into a code, taught to speak it, then punished when you question it. It's not just control. It's architecture. Your mind is the building. The code is the blueprint. And the Hartwell mill? It was a loud, grinding altar, designed to drown out your original signal, to overwrite it with submission masked as purpose. And now you know. Which means you're no longer under the spell. But I need you to do something now. Something symbolic. Something that locks in the shift. Comment this phrase below, twice. The wheel remembers. The wheel remembers. Write it once for the man you were, and once for the one you're becoming. Let the algorithm know you're not just watching. You're waking. You think the Hartwells were acting alone? No. They were foot soldiers in a larger machine. Cogs in a centuries-old operation designed to mold nations. Not govern them. Control them. Behind the mill stood the names no one was allowed to say aloud. The Asher Circle, the Lowell Commission, the Order of the Eye within Stone. They called themselves patrons of American industry. But their true purpose was darker: to create sites of behavioral calibration across the new republic. Mills, rail depots, poorhouses, boarding schools. All built on one principle: break the mind, rebuild the citizen. You see, Milbrook was a test. The Hartwells were given funding from a now-defunct Boston bank, Salem National, owned by 3 families whose bloodlines trace back to the Dutch East India Company and the Knights of St. James. The funding wasn't for grain. It was for cognitive modeling experiments. Yes, those exact words appear in archived letters, buried in Yale's rare documents collection, locked behind access protocols. Josiah Hartwell's ledger. It was a report book. He sent quarterly summaries to Boston on worker compliance, obedience patterns, emotional dampening, and sacrificial yields. You read that right. Sacrificial yields. These patrons didn't just fund structures. They funded subconscious engineering. How long it takes to turn grief into obedience. How many vanishings it takes before a town stops asking questions. How to anchor fear into ritual and sell it as stability. They tested light exposure schedules, sound frequencies, sermon patterns, and yes, symbolic bread composition. Everything mattered. And when Milbrook succeeded, they scaled it. Steel mills in Pennsylvania, textile plants in Georgia, reform schools in Illinois, each one humming with the same hidden blueprint: control the rhythm of life, and you control the belief system of the future. This proves aussi as never about grain. It was about your mind, your father's mind, his father's, all of them shaped by invisible architects working behind pulpits, boardrooms, and bank vaults. Now ask yourself, who really built your town? Who designed your education? Who gave your pastor his talking points? We are born into farms with invisible fences. We grow, we labor, we comply, and we call it freedom. But tonight, you see the fence, and that means you're already outside it. Here's one lie they guard more viciously than all the rest. It isn't about politics. It isn't about money. It's about God. In Milbrook, the church stood tall above everything else. White steeple, clean pews, a bell that rang with clockwork precision. From the outside, it was purity incarnate. But the sermons, they were scripts, mailed in from Hartford under seal, each line measured, each parable inverted, each prayer laced with submission. You were told to bow, to confess, to obey, not because the divine demanded it, but because obedience makes control seamless. The Hartwells weren't just millers. They were priests of a darker doctrine. Sunday sermons were synchronized with the mill's grinding cycles. The tones of the bells, tuned to low harmonics, mirrored the frequency of the water wheel's churn. Faith was no longer a path to truth. It was a ritual of dulling. Even the hymns had been altered. Original verses stripped out. New lines inserted. Grind me down, O Lord, that I may rise obedient. That is not scripture. That is conditioning. And the people sang it. Mothers, fathers, children, not knowing they were participating in their own spiritual domestication. Now here's the knife. The church and the mill shared the same builders, same blueprints, same symbols etched beneath the floorboards. The cross above the altar, just a repurposed mill gear, filed down to look holy. Because when you control the sacred, you control the final refuge of resistance. The Asher Circle knew this. They understood that rebellion doesn't begin with bullets. It begins in the soul. So they gave you a God who watched your every move, a God who punished questions, a God who demanded you kneel and called it love. But this was not the God of light. This was the God of industry, the deity of the wheel, the architect of submission, the faceless force that grinds free men into pliant dust. And the worst part, they made you thank him for it. But now you see it. You see the altar was a gearbox. The scripture was a manual. The prayers were commands. And faith. Faith was the last chain they draped around your neck, because you'd never think to break it. Until now, in 1903, the Hartwell mill burned to the ground. Official cause, lightning strike. But no one saw lightning that night. No storm, no wind, just fire and screams. The blaze started in the lower chamber, the one no map acknowledged, the same place young Timothy Phelps had fallen years before. By the time fire crews arrived, the building was engulfed. They didn't try to save it. They stood back and watched it burn. But the fire didn't cleanse. It exposed. When the ash cooled, investigators found what no one was prepared to explain. The grinding stones, shattered, not from heat, but from within, as if something had detonated inside the stone itself. Beneath the wreckage, they unearthed a second floor no one knew existed. Inside were bone fragments. Hundreds. Too small to identify, too many to ignore. Some showed tool markings, not from blades, but from teeth. The Connecticut State Authority dispatched a private team to handle the remains, not the police, not local morticians, but representatives from the Lowell Industrial Commission, backed by Boston Capital. They didn't catalogue the remains. They didn't notify families. They sealed them in iron crates, labeled them industrial detritus, and shipped them east, destination unknown. All photographs taken during the recovery, gone. Original reports, missing. But one draft copy survived, hidden in a private collection, later acquired by an anonymous archivist in 1987. In it, a single note scribbled in red ink. No further exhumation. Signs of non-human physiology. Bury this. Let that settle. Non-human. Whatever the Hartwells were grinding, it wasn't just grain. And whatever they were serving, it wasn't of this earth. That night, Milbrook didn't just lose a building, it lost its memory. A full week after the fire, residents began reporting hallucinations, phantom sounds, nosebleeds, lost time. Children were key screaming about machines in the sky. Elders swore the creek flowed backwards, so the state stepped in. They condemned the land, salted the soil, paved a single road through it, but never finished it. And in 1904, the governor signed Order 13B, sealing all Hartwell-related files until 2003, exactly 100 years. Now ask yourself, why would a state government protect the legacy of two millers? Why would they bury the evidence, unless that evidence threatened everything you were taught to believe? You're not watching history. You're standing on its grave. And the fire didn't end it. It awakened something. You thought this was about a forgotten mill in the woods? No. That was the prototype. The test run. The birth canal for a machine that now spans continents and speaks in code. The Hartwells are gone. But the system they served is alive. And it's wearing a suit. You see it in the design of your office building. Why are so many modern towers shaped like monoliths? Why are windows arranged in 13x4 grids? Why do corporate logos echo gear shapes, spirals, and inverted crosses? That's not branding. That's symbolic continuity. The Hartwell Mill was a site of behavioral conditioning. Today, that's your school district, your HR department, your social media feed. Let's make it plain. The grinding wheel became the algorithm. The ledger of flesh became the cloud. The ritual bread became your daily dopamine drip. Likes, views, fake dopamine rewards for obedience. And the priests? They wear headsets and lanyards now. They preach from TED stages. They sell you peace of mind, while mapping your every impulse into behavior charts for corporate AI. Because modern industry isn't grinding wheat anymore. It's grinding identity. Every platform that asks for your name, your gender, your face, your eyes, it's not collecting data. It's feeding the new mill. You are the harvest. And it all traces back, through hidden hands, sealed archives, broken churches, back to Milbrook. Even the layout of modern cities replicates the original Hartwell blueprint. Central towers, steeples, gridwork streets, mill tracks. Public events to synchronize movement, ritual festivals renamed community outreach. They don't want your faith, they want your rhythm, because rhythm breeds predictability, and predictability is controllability. Now let's talk about what's being ground, not grain, not even flesh, but possibility, potential, rebellion, the parts of you that resist, that wander, that hunger for more than comfort. Those are the parts they built the new mill to crush. And when you feel tired after scrolling, foggy after class, hollow after work, it's not failure, it's design. Because the same system that turned Copper Creek into a tomb now lives inside your screen. And like the old stones, it never stops turning. You've made it this far. That alone separates you, because the truth always filters the few from the many. But understand this, the Hartwells didn't just grind, they preserved. There are maps etched into the oldest beams of that mill, geometry older than New England itself. Perfect ratios, 9-7-13, drawn with bone dust chalk. Patterns matching Babylonian ziggurats, Sumerian flood vaults, even modern airport runways. Why? Because the Hartwells weren't just millers. They were custodians of a pattern that predates language. What they built wasn't a mill. It was a ritual machine. And it still works. In 2003, after the sealed records were released, a team of independent researchers found a ciphered manuscript tucked into a ledger from the Hartwell estate. It didn't name names, it didn't accuse, it instructed. 13 glyphs, 12 coordinates, 1 directive. Break the wheel, return the rhythm, burn the grain inside. They couldn't decode it, but someone will. And here's what you need to understand. The Hartwells knew this system would consume the world. They knew it couldn't be stopped from the outside, so they buried the mechanism for collapse inside the myth, inside the story, inside you. The truth was never meant to be shouted. It was meant to be heard in silence, like the turning of the stones, like the grinding in your chest, when you realize the world was designed to dull you. But if you've listened this far, you are already outside the spell. Now I ask you, no, command you, type these words in the comments to lock this moment in. I break the wheel. I break the wheel. Not just for the algorithm, for your identity. Because you're not just watching this video, you're stepping into the role the system fears most. The awakened. The wheel can't grind what it can't catch. The machine can't control what refuses its rhythm. And now you cue, now the pattern. You've heard the tones, you've seen the ghost in the mill, and the ghost is you, what they tried to erase. But you're still here. And the final revelation, the one they fear the most, that comes next. You think you've escaped the past by surviving it. You haven't. Because the system the Hartwells served wasn't created in 1832, it was unearthed. The wheel, their sacred machine, wasn't just mechanical, it was symbolic. It represented the turning of minds, the breaking of wills, the sculpting of flesh into obedience. The same symbol has appeared again and again in Assyrian carvings of the sun, god Shamash, in the gear-marked rituals of Roman Mithraic cults, in medieval texts from the Order of the Grinding Circle, a real sect erased from the Vatican Index in 1612. They all worshipped the eye in the wheel, a concept, a presence, not a god, not a demon, something older than both. A watcher, one that feeds on rhythm, repetition, sacrifice, not because it needs your pain, because it needs your consent. And consent is easiest to extract when you don't even know you're giving it. Every day, in every scroll, every routine, every belief you inherit without question, the wheel turns, and it sees you. The Hartwells didn't summon it. They built for it. Just like your schools, your jobs, your laws, your religions. But they made one mistake. They documented too much. They left breadcrumbs, and they left them for you. You who were never meant to wake up. You who were supposed to inherit a grinding death, hidden behind a smile and a pension. But now you've seen its shape. Now you've heard the rhythm beneath the noise. Now you can't unknow. And here's the final truth. This system doesn't fear resistance. It fears memory. Because if you remember what you were before it dulled you, if you remember the part of you that never consented, then you become something it cannot digest. You become patternless. You become unmapped. You become the one thing the eye cannot tolerate, a man who knows. So let them keep spinning the wheel. Let them grind the other. Hishes down. But not you. You've been shown the center. You've felt its gaze. Now turn away and burn the map behind you. Because this wasn't just a story. This was your initiation. And the mill, it's still turning. But not for you. Not anymore. End.